Hello students, I am Poulomi Dasa and today I am going to talk about language learning and the role of the subject teacher. Every taught subject in the classroom has to take recourse to a medium of thinking and instructing. Language forms the bridge between content and learning. Therefore, listening, speaking, reading and writing skills are integral transferable skills for students to acquire knowledge of all subjects. If you are a maths teacher, think, is there a way you can teach students how to solve mathematical problems without language? If you are a history teacher, ask yourself, can you explain to your students any historical event without using language? If you are a science teacher, well, I'm sure you won't be able to make your students understand any theory or experiment without taking the help of language. When the L1, the mother tongue of the students, is different from L2, the language of instruction in school, the process of developing LSRW skills in L2 are even more complex and multi-layered. This is because students generally have a weaker vocabulary bank and lesser exposure to speech acts in their L2. Thus, a lower communicative and linguistic competence of students in L2 when compared to L1 makes the task of the subject teacher instructing in L2 even more challenging. Language does not exist in a vacuum, and therefore, language teachers are advised not to limit themselves to only teaching grammar. The use of cognitively challenging content-based tasks and multilingual language teaching strategies help students to organically grasp and retain aspects of the language of their instruction pertaining to its use and meaning. Similarly, data or information also cannot be explained, interpreted, and disseminated unless subject teachers pay equal attention to the power of the words. Even though it might be outside the scope of the curriculum to overtly engage in language teaching, subject teachers can include tasks and activities within their lesson plans in such a manner that the students learn how to use language as a vessel and vehicle for their ideas. It is for this reason that introducing a bilingual teaching approach integrated into a non-language subject as in content and language integrated learning CLIL classrooms is considered a highly effective and successful practice. By now, you would have surely understood that the aim of this lesson is to dismantle the idea that language learning happens only in language classrooms. It is equally the responsibility of the subject teacher, that is, all the non-language teachers as well, to focus on the development of students' linguistic and communicative competence, at least within their discipline-specific domain. Learning the subject is therefore also learning its terminologies, understanding its concepts, and being able to discuss and write about them critically. In these scenarios, therefore, learning is actually taking place via all these channels. Meaning-focused input, that is learning through listening and reading. Meaning-focused output, that is learning through speaking and writing. Language-focused output, that is learning through deliberate attention to the features of the language. And fluency development, that is learning through working with known materials across the four skills at a higher than usual level of performance. It is indeed paradoxical that in spite of such a wide expanse of possibilities of learning and acquiring knowledge via these four threads, subject teachers tend to believe that what they are teaching is only content and not language. However, language is embedded in the concepts, contexts, and big ideas across all subject areas. Further, in many cases, key terms and concepts transfer easily from one subject to the other. There are instances when the same word in one subject may mean something completely different in another. Take, for example, the word tone. Think about what this term or concept means in a literature class. What does it mean in music? How about art classes? How do we use it in a language classroom? Helping students recognize these key terms and concepts, aiding them to understand when they do and do not directly transfer and how to use them to communicate is what makes every teacher a language teacher. But how can this be done? To take steps towards developing students' language across subject areas, we must start by keeping the following questions in mind. What key terms or new vocabulary will students see when reading this text, studying this unit, or exploring this concept? How do we let them know these terms are important? How do we give them practice using these terms in class, on homework, etc.? How do we provide repeated exposure to the terms? What do students need to do to show their understanding? How will we be asking them to show their understanding? How will we let them know what an acceptable answer looks like? But the practical dilemma that teachers suffer from is, do subject teachers have the time to add language lessons to their already busy subject class lesson plans? How can subject teachers integrate language learning within their content learning classrooms without wasting precious class time? The answer, therefore, lies in devising pedagogical strategies through which subject teachers can scaffold language learning within their instructions, materials, and tasks. But before we move further to understand how subject teachers can implement this, let us first acquaint ourselves with the concept of scaffolding with reference to teaching. What is scaffolding in a classroom? This term, introduced in the educational sense in 1970s by Brunner, refers to the interactional instructional relationship between adults and learners that enables a child or a novice to solve a problem beyond his unassisted efforts. And the ultimate goal of scaffolding is to develop student autonomy. To gain a better understanding of scaffolding, let us consider the analogy of a child learning to walk. First, a parent holds the child up. His feet barely touch the floor as he mimics walking. Slowly, the child is allowed to support more and more of his own weight. Next, he might support himself by holding onto an object while his parents watch. Or the child might be able to take a few steps holding the parent's fingers. Finally, the child is ready to take steps on his own, though his parents' hands might still just be some inches away. Soon enough, the child is walking and running on his own. Like these parents, teachers teaching new tasks and new content to their students initially have complete control and are expected to support their students. But once the students have learned the process and have acquired the knowledge, support has to be gradually withdrawn. A teacher incorporates instructional scaffolding by systematically building on students' experiences and knowledge as they are learning new skills. Just like the scaffold in this picture, these supports are temporary and adjustable. Many teachers do this naturally when teaching a new task or a strategy, whereas others need to consciously and intentionally incorporate scaffolding into their teaching styles. There is no hard and fast rule about how to go about scaffolding instructions. In fact, how a teacher chooses to go about it depends much on the task and the strategy in question and the student's needs. They can bank on their common sense, teaching experience, and the student's needs to assess what type of scaffolding or support will be required by the students. Although a teacher may scaffold instruction in a number of ways, it is nevertheless important to note that there are two critical elements to keep in mind when using instructional scaffolding: modeling and practice. Throughout the learning process, students should be able to watch their teachers model or demonstrate each step in the task or the strategy multiple times. Such modeling and repetition allows students to understand both how to perform each step and why each step is important. Knowing how and why leads to students' successful performance of the task or strategy. Equally important is students, either individually or as a group, getting the opportunity to work collaboratively with the teacher to practice the task or the strategy. There are three approaches to instructional scaffolding that teachers might use creatively and effectively. The first is content scaffolding. This kind of scaffolding allows students to focus on the skill being taught and not get bogged down by the content. The following three content scaffolding techniques are highly effective, especially for learners who are being instructed but are not competent in L2 or for learners with learning disabilities. Number one, using familiar or highly interesting content. Teachers often find that it is much easier to teach new skills to students when they begin with content that is familiar or highly interesting. This also keeps the student motivated to learn. Over time, the teacher can introduce content that is less familiar and more difficult, yet students would be able to apply the newly learned strategy to the unfamiliar content. The second is to use easy content. This technique involves using content that is suitable or even slightly lower in cognitive load for the students in order to teach them a new task or a strategy. This allows students to better focus on the strategy. For example, say a maths teacher wishes to explain a mathematical problem to the students. He can initially use a mathematical problem that is 1 or 2 grade level lower than the student's current cognitive level. This allows the students to use all their energy to master the problem-solving strategy. Then, after the students have developed confidence in the strategy, the teacher can gradually increase the difficulty of the problems. Number 3, starting with the easy steps. One simple way to scaffold instruction is for the teacher to perform and model the more difficult steps of a task while letting students to do the easier steps. Gradually, students would take the responsibility of completing the more difficult steps. During the learning process, the teacher continues to model and help students with any problems that they might have. The second approach is task scaffolding. In this type of scaffolding, a teacher begins by specifying the steps in a task or instructional strategy. He then models the steps in the task, verbalizing his thought processes for the students. In other words, the teacher thinks aloud and talks through each of the steps he is proceeding with. Once the students are able to understand the steps in the task, they practice the task independently. The teacher observes their performance closely and may even coach students who experience problems. It is essential to note here that even though students have watched their teacher demonstrate a task, they might not actually understand how to perform it independently. Therefore, it is crucial for teachers to scaffold by continuing to model the steps or procedures until correct independent performance is achieved. The last approach is material scaffolding. Material scaffolding involves the use of written prompts or cues or diagrams or flowcharts to help students perform a task or use a strategy. This may take the form of cue sheets, Word webs, concept maps, or guided examples that list the steps necessary to perform a task given as handouts or posters to the students. Students can use these as a reference to reduce confusion and frustration. Ideally, the prompts and the cues should be phased out over time as students master the steps of the task or the strategy. Now that we have learned how teachers can apply scaffolding for teaching new tasks, strategies, and concepts to any academic task that requires multiple complex steps across any grade, irrespective of students' cognitive ability, let us try to understand how subject teachers, that is, non-language teachers, can scaffold language learning within their classrooms. I will discuss a few mention-worthy strategies which can be used as per your students' requirements. Number 1. Developing competency and skill required for comprehending, identifying, selecting, and integrating information. To ensure this, tasks need to be clearly explained. The disciplinary content should be treated as a vehicle for critical thinking. Any idea or strategy or method should be intentionally repeated in the classroom, as repetition is an important tool for retention. And finally, students should be encouraged when they try to think or ideate critically. Second, highlighting the underlying conceptual framework. Teachers can do this by using content obligatory and content compatible words. For example, to teach the topic of energy, the subject teacher might introduce, explain, and repeatedly use content obligatory words like work, renewable and non-renewable, mechanical, electricity, radiation, heat, conservation, closed system, light, wave, hydroelectric, kinetic, potential, etc. And content-compatible words like definition, explanation, prove, calculate, measure, convert, transfer, and transform. Third, focusing on teaching subject-specific vocabulary. Teachers can achieve this by highlighting and repeating the concepts, giving concept maps and glossaries to students, and also by pitching concepts and texts at a level of the student's present cognitive competence. Anything more difficult than what the students are ready to grasp would eventually lead to meaningless memorization and rote learning. Number 4. Analyzing subject-specific word formation. This is a vital decoding skill that students should master to comprehend new and complex concepts independently. Teachers can aid this by fostering word consciousness and making students aware of the logic of root words and how words are formed. Also, how prefixes and suffixes work so that students can predict or guess and finally learn part or whole of the words. For example, dis meaning not or opposite is a prefix which gives meaning to words such as disagree, disharmony, disintegration, etc. Sub meaning under or less can be used as a prefix and result in creation of words like subtract, submarine, subtraction, etc. An English teacher might introduce the prefix trans meaning across or through, and this can be subsequently reinforced by the content teachers. Social science teachers can use the prefix to discuss terms such as transportation, transformation, transatlantic, transcultural, etc. and give example from terms beyond her subject domain. To reinforce students' understanding, science teachers could also discuss terms such as transfusion, transparent, transplant, etc. Teachers can make connections to related words beyond their domain, giving students a chance to deduce that all terms that contain the prefix trans means across or through. Number 5. Focusing on the structure of the text and its arrangement. Understanding the features of the text and its arrangements are vital clues that help in decoding the meaning of the text. Teachers can help students develop an eye for analyzing the structure and patterns of the text by making them note the keywords and linkers that are present in the text. Let's make a note of the keywords that function as signposts in most prominent structures or patterns of text arrangements. The first is a chronological or a sequential pattern, and the keywords could be firstly, secondly, then, before, after, eventually, next, earlier, etc. The second pattern of text arrangement could be a cause and an effect, and the keywords could be because, since, if, then, as a result, consequently, etc. The third pattern could be problem and solution, and the keywords could be while, yet, but, rather, same, as well as, like, unlike, as opposed to, etc. While we as teachers develop in our students a sensitivity towards the structure of the texts, we should also make students understand that a text does not normally follow the same structure throughout. Critical signpost words like however, in contrary to, and, but, or, nevertheless, in spite of, function as crucial markers that denote change of pattern of the text and yet help in maintaining the cohesion of the text. Number 6. Chunking of long sentences to simplify meaning of complex concepts. Teachers can help students comprehend the meaning of long, complex sentences by teaching them the technique of chunking long sentences, unpacking long sentences that contain too many clauses, extended noun phrases, conditional sentences, passive voice, etc. by breaking them into parts so that the meaning of the parts can be easily understood is a vital transferable skill. Teachers can ask students to underline the sections and help students figure out how parts relate to other parts within the sentence to aid meaning formation and how the concepts explained in the phrases are connected to each other. Number 7. Orchestrating an interactive, energetic and enthusiastic atmosphere in class and using a combination of instructional approaches. Rather than trying to maintain a pin-drop silence in class and repeat. Rather than trying to maintain a pin-drop silence in class and pass it in the name of discipline, we teachers should encourage students to construct their own knowledge with the help of peer or pair work, to formulate and express ideas on their own. As Julia Strong points out in her paper, Literacy Across the Curriculum, talk is central to learning. To deepen understanding, talking through problems plays an important role. Discussing, explaining, questioning, and using talk and writing to tussle with ideas are all aspects of the struggle towards clarity and deepening thought in any subject. If teachers know how to generate open questions and extend their students' thinking through focused discussion and through partner and group discussion, they can not only promote thinking but also encourage learning. Similarly, by promoting cooperation among students, encouraging active learning, by providing prompt feedback, by communicating high expectations from students, a teacher can impact a learner. Scaffolding, therefore, can and should be used in combination with other successful instructional techniques, such as those involving cooperative groups or peer tutors. For example, a teacher might create a heterogeneous reading group in which she would intentionally include students of various reading levels. Those students with a better understanding of the strategy would provide support or scaffolding for those who are experiencing difficulty. The group as a whole would be responsible for using the strategy. The same procedure could be used with peer tutors. In either case, teachers should remember that it is critical to provide support and model steps when needed. Number 8. Mimicking error detection and correction that aids critical thinking. Teachers ought to model the process of error detection and correction as part of their scaffolding processes. This is beneficial for several reasons. Students understand what they should be doing when they get stuck. Teachers can model stuckness. They simulate getting stuck and model how to talk themselves through the problem rather than simply giving up. Students learn that it is okay to make a mistake so long as they understand why they made it and are determined to correct it. This paves the path of critical thinking and argumentation. With this discussion, we have reached almost the end of this lesson. But before we conclude, let us quickly revise the 8 strategies that subject teachers can use to scaffold language learning in their classrooms. Number 1, developing competency and skills required for comprehending, identifying, selecting, and integrating information. Number 2, highlighting the underlying conceptual framework. Number 3, focusing on teaching subject-specific vocabulary. Number 4, making students aware of subject-specific word formation. Number 5, focusing on the structure of the text and its arrangement. Number 6, chunking of long sentences to simplify meaning of complex concepts. Number 7, orchestrating an interactive, energetic and enthusiastic atmosphere in the classroom and using a combination of instructional approaches. Number 8, mimicking error detection and correction that aids students' critical thinking. Scaffolding, as we have observed, can be used in almost any disciplines, whether it be mathematics, language, arts or science, across any age group of students, in L1 or L2 instructional languages to teach LSRW skills that range from reading comprehension to writing a 5-paragraph essay to ideating and writing a science research paper to solving a mathematical problem to writing research publications. And scaffolding language learning in subject-specific lesson plans seems to be the most effective tool for non-language subject teachers to help students absorb, analyze, and generate knowledge. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Happy learning!